So, many people, including my parents who have seen me through my career for the past 40-odd years, don't have a clue what a curator is. And what does that have to do with costumes? Well, if you look up Google, this is what it'll tell you a curator is. In my case, very simply, I deal with collections, historic collections of costumes and textiles for Parks Canada. However, the other part of my job, which is the really, really fun part, is that I get to make historic reproductions of some of the artifacts that we have in our collection. And had I not got my start in the field of costuming and wardrobe, I never would be where I am right now. So a costumer, well, a costumer can be quite a number of things. But basically, a costumer is someone who makes costumes, or they can be a costume designer. They could be a wig maker, they could be a milliner, they could be a shoemaker. Anything that you consider an aspect of costume falls under the mode of costuming. So we got a lot of scope there. So as I said, as a curator, I oversee the historic collections, but I also recreate reproductions of these collections. Now, what's a typical day for me? Well, the only thing typical about my days is that no day is the same. I plan to come into work every morning, about 8 o'clock, sit down at my desk, turn on my emails, listen to my messages, and I can forget about what I'd planned to do the night before. Because I might get an email saying, "Hello, Heather. Stephen Harper is attending a dinner soiree on Saturday evening, and he would like to wear a formal outfit that looks like he came out of 1812. Great. Here's his measurements. So I have to either make up the suit myself, or I find one of my contractors to make it for me. Of course, while I'm doing that, I might get a phone call from a company who says, "We need a dinosaur costume. We need it next week. Can you make it so that it has a ventilation system inside so the person wearing it doesn't get too hot?" I can do that because I'm a costumer. Or maybe I'm going to get a call from a small theater company who says, our costumer got the measles and can't work, and we need 18 wigs that look like Marie Antoinette. Can you do them for us? Yeah, I can do them for you. Yeah. So, what's a typical day for me? It's anything goes. However, because of that, I never get bored in my job. And it opens so many doors to doing so many different things. I've met so many different people from so many walks of life because these are the people who need aspects of costuming. I've worked with groups like church groups who need choir gowns made. I've worked with young actors who are launching their first production in the Fringe Festival and need some help. I've worked with interesting film crews and the likes of Tom Hanks and Michael J. Fox, because all those things fall under what I do as a costumer. So, how did I get here? Well, I took kind of the long, arduous academic route. I started off with an undergraduate degree in human ecology, where I studied costume design and textile science. And then I did a master's degree in historic dress. And then I went back and did another undergraduate degree in conservation. And then I did another master's degree in costume history. And now I'm working on a PhD. But that's not the typical route you have to take. I did that because I just love learning. A typical route for a costumer is just to have some sense of creativity in whatever field you want to go into. So if you're going into costume and wardrobe, you want to have maybe a sense of a love of fibers, perhaps, a willingness to work bizarre hours, the ability to think outside of the box, because let me give you my example of creating wigs for an era production based around the end of the 1700s. So think of Marie Antoinette. Well, we have to make 20 some odd wigs, but there's no money to make them. We've got a budget of $50. Well, how are we going to do that? Well, let's see, what could we do? Well, we could take pantyhose, we could cut them apart so that the length of pantyhose we have fits over somebody's head, and then we could take quilt batting and cut it in strips and roll it up and glue it, and the next thing you know, you've got a big white-looking powdered wig that's got big curls and ringlets on it. So if you've got the ability to think beyond the box, to be creative, and no fear of jumping in, this might be the job for you. Why? Well, because. I chose this field because I loved it. I was introduced to the field of costuming and historic artifacts at the same time when I was about 16. And I thought I got a fantastic summer job working for one of the small museums in Winnipeg, making reproductions of their artifacts. And it was then that I thought, okay, what do I have to do now to figure out how to get to do this all the time? This is what I want to do. So that one little summer job opened up the door to me to going down my path of working with the artifacts and doing reproductions. It allows me to be creative. A director might say to me, we want such and such, we want the actors in this play to, we're doing Shakespeare, but we want it to look like it's set in the 21st century. Oh, I guess that's not future now, 23rd century. So it allows a lot of creativity. And within the field of costuming, you don't have to be just a basic costumer who sews costumes under somebody else's direction. You could be the one who makes the decisions. You could be the designer. You could be the one who specializes in making footwear, or who specializes in wigs, or maybe props. Maybe you're the one who's the expert in making umbrellas. There's so much open to you when you go into this field. Changes. What changes have I seen? Well, I've been working in this field for a long time, so I've seen a lot of changes. The best change I have seen is that health and safety regulations are much tighter than when I started. Because when you're working with creating costumes, you may be faced with working with toxic chemicals such as solvents and glues and dyes. Well, when we started out, we didn't wear protective clothing. We didn't even wear face masks. Now, because we're much more aware of the hazards working with these materials, a lot of the materials have been removed from the market. We're no longer able to work with them. And the materials that we still can work with, we are better prepared. We wear respirators, we work in fume hoods. It's a very different world. So in that sense, it's a very positive move forward. What's a very negative move that I have seen is the budgetary cuts. That has affected pretty much everybody all across the scope of jobs. With us, it affects us in two ways. One, theater companies, film production companies no longer have the budgets that they may once have had, so they can't produce the types of productions that they may have had at one time. So that cuts back on us. That cuts back on the range of productions that a theater company may host. It cuts back on the money allowable to create costuming for a production. So what some of the theater companies are forced to do now is to maybe shop for their costumes. So they might go to Stratford and buy or rent the costumes needed for a particular production rather than building them here. So that's a big deficit, that's a big change that we've seen in this field. It also affects, budgetary cuts also affect the amount of money that people can spend to access the things that we do. So if you work in the theater and you're producing costumes for a play, sales have gone down in the amount of tickets that have been sold because people may not feel that it is a necessity to buy season's tickets to a play. That might be a luxury, and luxuries are the first things that go when you have to tighten your belt. So the budgetary restraints are the biggest change that we have seen in this field. However, that's not to put you off, that's just to say that you have to work a little bit harder, you have to fight a little bit harder, you have to be a little bit better to maintain your position. Working conditions. Well, I have worked in workshops that look like they have been bombed out in the Third World War, to workshops that look like they were created for royalty. It all depends on which company you're working for, if it's indeed a company, how much their budget is, what they're willing to spend, and what you're willing to put up with. I have to say, even the worst conditions I've worked in have been absolutely fantastic because, again, I get to do what I'm good at doing, I get to create, and in the end, it's all fun. It's playing. You know, think about how, not to stereotype here, but girls, when you were making Barbie doll clothes, that was fun. That wasn't work. Well, I'm doing the same thing, except I'm making them on a human scale. Salary, you're not going to get rich in this field. And you're going to have to work really hard before you get paid anything. You may have to do a lot of volunteer work. You may have to take on jobs that say, I can pay you $500 to make 28 costumes. And when you figure it out, you're making 50 cents an hour. Well, you can't think that way. You have to think, this is a job I'm doing. I absolutely love doing it. And maybe the next time, if I do a really good job this time, they will have more money for me. But each time you do a job, you're putting your name out there and you're putting your reputation out there. And so when one group says to another group, I need a costumer who can come up with something in 2 weeks. I know somebody who can do that. You should see what they did to our last production. It was fantastic. So little bit by little bit, you start at the bottom and you work your way up. And when you get to the top, there are so many doors that open to you that you can go in so many different directions. Dress code, well, it's kind of like, are you working in a bombed out basement or are you working in a 5-star suite? You have to think about what you're doing for the day. You know, are you going to be dyeing? Are you going to be painting? You're not going to wear your best clothes when you're coming in for a day of actual hands-on working. However, if you're going to be measuring up a member of royalty for a costume, well, you might want to spiff up just a wee bit. Hours of work, well, let's see, how many hours are in a day and how many days in a week? Because for certain periods of time, you may be working 24/7. For other periods of time, you might be sitting there twiddling your thumbs thinking, what the heck? I got to get going on something here. There's nothing to do. It's a very sporadic kind of field. It's based on when the costumes are needed. And sometimes the costumes aren't needed for periods of time, and then sometimes they're needed within 21 days. So it's very erratic. If you need to get up at 8, be at work at 9, leave at 5, and do this Monday to Friday, I think you're not going to cope well in this field. But if you really like the flexibility that this kind of job gives you, this is the one for you. Benefits. Well, again, it depends on who you're working for. Most costumers or people working in wardrobe are basically their own independent company. So you do not get benefits from whoever gives you the contract because very few costumers are employed full-time with a company. Now, if you're working with theater companies, you can join a union and you will have much more flexibility in the benefits that are available to you, your work hours and that sort of thing. If you're not part of the union, then you have to decide for yourself what kind of benefits you want to give to yourself. To me, the biggest benefit is, yeah, it'd be nice to have a pension to retire to, but I have spent most of my life working in this field and have been happy doing it. I have a great sense of job satisfaction, and I think nothing counts more than that. How can I find a job and who will hire me? Well, indeed, it's not easy. You have to get yourself out there. People with formal training may not have any better chance than somebody who's walking right off the street with their CV in their hand. What you have to do is put yourself out there, introduce yourself to people in the field, be willing to maybe work for them for a day for free. Say, look, I'm going to work for you. You tell me what you need done on Friday. I'm going to come in. I won't charge you, but you see how I work. And then if there's an opening that comes up or you got a place for me for even a week, let me know. I have former students who have done that, who did a lot of volunteer work for the Manitoba Theatre Company, and they're now employed by them because they were able to prove themselves. They came in and they worked hours and hours. One day they'd come in and maybe they'd sew on 300 buttons. Maybe the next day they'd come in and they'd take off 300 buttons. Maybe they'd sew 400 meters of drapery fabric. But you have to be willing to show that you're going to take the sort of crap jobs and it'll work you up till you get your reward of being able to maybe costume somebody like Keanu Reeves. So who will hire me? Again, get your name out there, put your name forward. Do not limit your search for a job in traditional theater or film areas. Walk into a church that has a choir. Put your notice up on a bulletin board saying, I can do repairs on choir gowns. I can make choir gowns. Maybe go to a dance company. On their bulletin board, put your name and your CV up. Say, I can make costumes. I can do kiddies' costumes. So that mom who hasn't a clue how to make the fairy costume for her little girl for the recital that's coming up in May, she'll see your name, she'll phone you up and say, whoa, I got the materials, can you do it? So, and it's just little things like that. And then, of course, the word spreads. Oh, I met this costumer, she did this brilliant thing. Well, I have a dinner to go to, and we're supposed to dress up like the 1930s. Okay, well, here, I'll give you her name. And it just snowballs that way. So to the future and beyond. Well, I think every day that we move forward in this industry, it becomes a little bit harder. You have to work harder and you have to be better. It's not an industry that you can just step into. It's an industry that you have to work very hard for. And if you decide to stay in Winnipeg, it's a very small community. So you don't want to burn any bridges. You want to make friends with everybody. You want to be amiable, and you want to show that you're willing to work and do all sorts of different things. Eventually, it pays off. I don't want to scare you off because we do need people coming into this field, but it is a rough field to enter. You have to work very hard at it. And it may seem like you're getting nowhere fast, but the next thing you know, you turn around and you're at the top of the pile. And you think, geez, how'd I get here? This is great. Now, as I said at the start of this, I started off in costuming, and it opened a lot of doors for me. I always keep my hand in costuming, although the higher up the ladder I get, the less I get to do because I'm bogged down with, all sorts of other different things. But I still like to always be costuming for one thing or another. That's kind of my dessert for the end of a long day. But I could have taken a different route. I could have gone, instead of curatorial, I could have gone into conservation. And I could have worked with conserving costumes and textiles, historic articles of fiber. I could have gone into forensic diagnosis, where I could be working behind a microscope and I could be given a Coptic textile. You know what a Coptic textile is? That's a textile that is dated before Jesus Christ was born. So we're looking at these early textiles, BC textiles, thousands of years old. Well, are they thousands of years old? If I'm a forensic expert, I'm going to look at those fibers and I'm going to see whether or not it is as old as it's purported to be. So the field of costuming, don't just limit yourself to making costumes for a small theater company. If that's what you want to do, that's brilliant. But that's a good starting point too. So if you want to move on, the door's just open for you. It's all where your imagination takes you.